So I should first say that I owe a great debt to everybody who taught me from K through 12 in public school. Teachers in the public education system are the unsung saints of our suburban world. And that leads me into my story about why third grade is bullshit. You might disagree and say that's where you learn cursive and the difference between igneous and volcanic rocks. But when I came into third grade, an introverted, overweight, but imaginative kid with asthma and bad eyesight, I craved not rock differentiation, but a provocateur. And I got a teacher named Mr. Sargo. Mr. Sargo was the rosy-faced, bespectacled, darling, dry, monotonal third grade teacher that you would see in a send-up or a stand-up routine. And I needed something more. And I think that's where I first learned what I've carried on since then, which is in education sometimes, you gotta do it yourself. And I think the best example of this was when we had our first main project of the fall. We were going to study and present a project on the Aztec civilization. You could not ask for much cooler a subject. I mean, this was an amazing ancient civilization born of blood, war, an amazing culture, and snuffed out almost instantaneously. Didn't really get a good picture of that in our third grade class taught by Mr. Sargo. It's a little dry, a lot of the blood was kept out. I mean, he was a rosy-faced teacher teaching a lot of rosy-faced students, and in retrospect, I understand. But when it came time to do our final presentations, he gave out a piece of paper, possible projects that you could choose for your final presentation about the Aztec civilization. You could make a sugar cube temple. You could produce some food similar to that used in the Aztec Empire, which to me is odd for third graders because A, it's a lot of research, and B, it's a lot of time spent around the kitchen, and I had no interest in either. And they went on like this, and they were pretty dry and pretty boring and pretty predictable. And so I brought it home, and I was kind of lackadaisical around the house because, I mean, I hadn't engaged at all in all of this time. And I showed it to my dad. He's like, you know, this is bullshit. The Aztecs were freaking unbelievably cool. And he started telling me these stories about tales that were recounted from conquistador authors who were there to see blood sacrifices. And he brought out his books because he's a poet and he's an author and he's a reader and he has books about everything, including the Aztec civilizations and blood sacrifices. And I started reading them and I thought this was amazing. And so we decided our final project, and you know, in public education in elementary school, your final project is kind of you and your dad's final project. We were going to do it ourselves. We were going to do something different. So after the fourth sugar cube temple and the fifth little tortilla came out in the projects, my name was called. And so I got up from my desk, which is the far reaches of the classroom, and I donned this gigantic Montezuma recreation headdress. We had spent 20 hours going to all the different hardware stores, finding blue feathers, green feathers, fake gold beads, and sewing them and gluing them together. I was a third grader and it went out to here. So the proportions were really interesting. And I stood up and I donned my dagger, the flint dagger that the Aztecs used to gut and flay their prisoners. Mine was made out of cardboard and tinfoil, but you got the idea. But just in case they didn't get the idea, my dad wanted to be sure. And so he prepared for me excerpts from Diaz's first-hand accounts of the sacrifices. And so I got up in my headdress and I looked around at all the rosy-faced third graders around me, and they had no idea what was coming. And it was great. And I could see these inexplicably quiet twins who were always silent, hence the terminology for everything. And as I started recounting how the thighs were cut and eaten in banquets, how the torso was fed to the dogs, how the head was put on a pole, right when I got to the part where they cut through the ribcage and pulled out the still beating heart, blood drenching the walls everywhere, the inexplicable twins threw up all over the floor. And you know, in retrospect, I know a lot more about the Aztecs than I know about rock formations. So I feel like sometimes when you take it into your own hands and you do it yourself, you might have some collateral damage, but you'll also have something that'll stay with you for a long time. Thank you.